Hi, everybody. Hope you are doing well and have a small amount of energy left in you for this short presentation. Just to give you a little background about myself, my name is Weston Pew, and I'm from Bozeman, Montana, and I now currently live in Brooklyn, New York, where I split my time between Montana during the summers working on this new organization I've created called InterWild, and working in Brooklyn. I'm getting a master's degree in experiential education, focusing on regenerative community development, transformational leadership, and rites of passage, and how all of those connect to really community, holistic community transformation. I spent 4 years before moving to Brooklyn. I was back in Montana creating a 170-mile interfaith pilgrimage trail called the Sacred Door Trail, which is a interfaith pilgrimage trail dedicated to spiritual unity, peace, and our connection to earth and community. So through that process, I brought together a range of faith-based leaders from various traditions and a range of various indigenous leaders from different tribes around Montana and actually the world. In 2012, the summer of 2012, we had the opening ceremonies of the trail where we brought together all these leaders to bless the land and the trail in their own traditions to establish it as a shared sacred space. The Sacred Door Trail is one of many shared sacred spaces that are popping up in the world that are a symbol of this emerging InterSpiritual consciousness. And from there, I jumped into New York. But creating these shared sacred spaces and celebrating those spaces' connection to nature is a huge passion of mine. But what I want to do today, just to kind of help spur the conversation in the direction that we're moving with this, is to offer a model from integral theory that I've found really helpful in approaching the reality of my own experience in the world, of cultural experiences in the world. It's called the Aqal Model, and it's attributed to Ken Wilber and his work in adult development and integral theory. And I think I might be in your guys' way over here, but I've been given a small window to maneuver in. So this is it's a beautiful lens to help both dissect and engage with the reality and the experience of systems, whether it be one individual or the collective human species. So for example, if we're looking at it just from the perspective of the human experience, we have the upper left, which represents the individual's interior world, their thoughts, beliefs, experiences within themselves. And then the upper right is the exterior, which represents the behavior of the individual, and also their biology, the physiology, the exterior of ourselves, in that very scientific world. The lower left is the interior we. So you'll see on the left is the interiors, on the right are the exteriors, the tops are the I's, and the bottom halves are the we's, but of the interior and the exterior. So the bottom left is the interior we, which Wilber calls culture. So what are the thoughts and beliefs that govern culture? And then in the bottom right, you have the exterior we, which are really the systems. What are the policies that govern our society, the societal structures? Politicians live in the bottom right. Philosophers and writers live in the bottom left. Contemplatives, we live in the upper left, and then scientists would be in the upper right. But for the purpose of creating a movement, a holistic movement needs to be really hitting all four quadrants for it to be effective. If we just live in the contemplative space, we're always going to be trapped there, and how are we going to turn contemplation into action? So when we look at the contemplative space, this movement is really strong on in the upper left. And so we have to look at how can we be more effective in all quadrants and not just in that upper left interior self-cultivation place that comes about through meditation and contemplation and all of that. So I have just some ideas, some questions that I'm going to throw out to us that we're going to approach through contemplative dialogue in the breakout, the 45-minute breakout sessions. So, you know, if we're looking at this lens through the lens of the InterSpiritual movement, we look at the upper left and we'd say, what are the values that are governing this movement? And as an activist or a change maker, a part of the InterSpiritual movement, you'd be asking yourself as an individual, you know, what are my values? What are the values that I'm working with that are connected to the InterSpiritual movement that I want to bring home and plant into my own communities? And one that I really want to look at, I mean, we'll be talking about those all weekend, but what I want to look at this afternoon in the form of a question is, what is our shadow? You know, what is the shadow and the underbelly of the contemplative movement? That aspect of ourselves that, as a group, maybe where we have a little trepidation around addressing. You know, for example, 90% of the conference is white people that can afford to come here. You know, we just need to be aware of that. And so in this upper eye, we're addressing those shadow aspects of ourselves and the movement, so that we can really come into harmony and know our blind spots. And so then in the upper right, it's really about behavior. So what are the practices we as individuals and both as a collective movement, what are we trying to bring back and engage our communities with? Contemplative dialogue. You know, Adam's going to talk about the HAB communities tomorrow. That's a beautiful practice to engage your community. Creating these spaces for group meditation, group support. How do we support ourselves and our friends within this movement to stay strong? I mean, in activism in general, there's such a high burnout rate. So how can we nurture the aspects of ourselves that so quickly get burnt out when we engage in this type of kind of collective movement building and transformation? And in the upper left quadrant, I forgot to mention too, relationships. That the experience of relationship. How are we deepening our relationship to ourselves? How are we deepening our relationship to the earth? And how are we deepening our relationship to community? And that type of awareness was coined by as a self-realized perspective. A deep ecologist named Arne Næss from Norway coined this term, the self-realized individual, and he defined it. I mean, it's been defined by various traditions, but his definition was an individual that understands the interdependent relationship between self, earth, and community. And I think that's a really beautiful way to describe self-realization in a way that doesn't create any knee-jerk reactions from people in any various traditions. It's very docile. And contemplative practices foster that deeper awareness to self, earth, and community. So I can go up to an activist that's in the environmental movement who is an atheist, and I can talk about the importance of contemplation to foster those commitments and connections within his world, and he can understand it. Whereas if I come at him and say, well, it's going to help, you know, increase your connection to God or to spirit, he might be like, you know, there might be some knee-jerk reactions there. So looking at, you know, relationship. There's the great quote by Thomas Berry who said, "The universe is not a collection of objects, but a communion of subjects." And so we find ourselves in this kind of rite of passage moment in humanity where, you know, to jump off of what Matthew was saying earlier today, moving from axial 1 into this new axial 2, where we're moving from the glory of the individual into the glory of the collective. And we're moving from this place of independence to a place of interdependence. So that world of relationship lives in that upper left, and then we use those practices in the upper right to really nurture that world of relationship. And one thing that I want to touch on in the upper right in terms of practices in this movement that could be really beneficial, yes, you know, all that we've talked about, but nature connection really needs to be a part of that. And how are we really connecting our youth to those wild places in nature that can also connect them to the wild places in themselves, where they source creativity, where they recognize their connection to humanity through their connection to nature. So in the bottom, so the question this afternoon will be how are we supporting others in this community, their personal practices, and how are we going to really help create practices that get the word out about what it is that we're trying to create here. So the lower left, the inner we, culture and beliefs. And what I want to look at here later on this afternoon in this category is how are we really engaging the social justice movement? How are we engaging the environmental movement with what we're talking about here over the course of this week? Why does the social justice movement need to care about what we're talking about? Why does the environmental movement, why should they care about what we're talking about? So that's something, and how can we bring these activists into this conversation? One organization that is doing a good job of that is the Bioneers out of San Rafael, California. They focus on social justice, environmental justice, as well as spirituality, basically. And their motto is, it's all alive, it's all connected. And so they're doing this beautiful job of bridging all those these three different issues together. Another organization, Awakening the Dreamer, and through the Pachamama Alliance, which you all may have heard of before, they were in the contemplative arena for a while, and now they're starting to really come out into the right side, into the behavior, action, and systems side, and engage in social change, environmental change, activism, really giving the tools to their members to be effective campaign organizers and the building of social movements. So how do we work with them to all help each other move in the same direction? And then in the bottom right, we have the social systems. How are we influencing policy? What does contemplation have? How does that have anything to do with policy? But it does, and we need to also, pick out within this movement who are our strength in policymakers. Who are our system shapers? Who are our cultural philosophers and writers? Who are the folks that are, dialed into the upper right, the behavior, the practices, and who are the folks in the upper left really just dialed in and focused on the contemplative aspects of this unfolding movement. So how are we, so in the bottom right as well, another question we're going to be exploring this afternoon is how are we creating and supporting new communities, new systems, new models through this movement? So those are a couple questions. We'll be exploring this model more in depth, in a half hour, whenever the breakout sessions are. And it's just a beautiful tool to look at your own self and how are you engaging in the world. Where are your strengths within this sphere? Where do you need more kind of engagement? And making sure that when you're creating groups of activists, how are you surrounding yourself by folks that represent each of these quadrants and are pulling strengths together from each of these quadrants so you can create a really holistic force that is engaging in all the various aspects of the unfolding of culture and society. So thank you for your time. Hope to see you at the breakout.
Thank you, Weston. So we have time for a question or two. Weston, for you, what's the connection between the InterSpiritual movement and this other array of movements that are in this interconnection?
Well, I think if we are going to create deep change in the lower right, it's going to have to come out of the awareness that we're all connected, that our collective fate and destiny as human beings is a collective fate, not an individualistic fate. And that realization comes out of contemplation and dialogue and self-work. So that's really why I'm a huge part of my focus is on education. How can we create educational models that are much more allowing for these contemplative meditative practices to really take root in folks, so that when they become leaders and when they become politicians, they are coming with the awareness that recognizes the kind of interconnection of all of these spheres and the importance of that contemplative place and role within society.
I'm curious when it comes to the bottom right in policy, how important do you feel it is to break out of the two-party system that we have?
I think a lot about this, and I think it's extremely important. I mean, the health of any ecosystem is based off of how diverse it is. So using nature as a model for our political system, as we should use nature as a model for everything, diversity is honored, and the more diverse politicians and platforms we have to express the desires, needs, and wants of the people, the more strong and vibrant a culture and a world we're going to have, and the more connected of a world we're going to have. And I would say the same thing is true for economic models as well.
Say more about your trail.
The Sacred Door Trail is like the Appalachian Trail or the Pacific Crest Trail, it's a compilation of already existing National Forest Service trails that make up a 170-mile loop on the border of Idaho and Montana, around the Big Hole Valley. And it's simply a wilderness trail that we have kind of created a movement around it to designate it with this deeper intention, representing this shared sacred space that honors spiritual unity and our connection to earth and community. So, where the idea there was to use our connection to earth as a platform to rise above these individual belief systems, to find that place of common ground. And celebrate that, and create, really, it's how can we create more and more symbols? The human mind relates so much to symbols, so how do we bring in more symbols in our culture that represent what is emerging through the InterSpiritual movement? And the trail is just one of many symbols that are really anchoring that energy into the collective consciousness. So now I'm looking at how we can create, with a couple other organizations in New York City, how can we create an urban interfaith pilgrimage trail that stretches the collective boundaries of what is the sacred and how does the sacred interact with society and culture. So it won't be going by any churches or monasteries or anything like that. It'll go by Zuccotti Park, where Occupy Wall Street happened. It will go by Dorothy Day's neighborhood. It will go by the Natural History Museum. It will go by a Superfund site where there's been oil polluting the Gowanus River. So all of these are expressions of the sacred. And where we have not allowed the sacred its full, basically the trail goes by all these different aspects of our culture and how our culture is unfolding. It asks the question, how are you a part of this story as an individual, and how can you work to change it on an individual and also collective level to come into a higher alignment with the sacred unfolding that is reality, the universe, etc.
So when people go on those walks, they have that information and they have those questions that they're walking.
Exactly. It's just, they'll have a guidebook that, on the Sacred Door Trail, they have a guidebook that tells you how to do it and all that. And then there are these invitational questions. What are your gifts? How can you use your gifts to help change what's happening in terms of our relationship to the environment, in terms of our relationship to community and what that means, and in terms of our relationship to ourselves. So recognizing that the sacred is found in all those places, not just halls of reverence and churches. Yeah.
I appreciate your commitment to education and pursuing your own master's degree there. Can you speak a little bit to the American public school system and how, I'm not sure if you're looking at primary or secondary and what level of education, but how we can change it?
Well, for a country that honors innovation and creativity and prides itself on its founding roots of innovation and creativity, we've done a really good job at pretty much suffocating that entirely out of our education model. So that makes for really good sheeps, that makes for people that can follow the orders and follow the rules in a really great way. So that serves some aspects of our society, but for the most part, it really doesn't serve anybody that is trying to, get ahead in the world. And so basically we need, what is being seen working in New Zealand is a much more engaged model where, kids are taking a little bit more control over their learning, apprenticeships that are getting them out of schools into businesses. Not every kid wants to be a doctor. Some kids are happy being, a farmer, and getting them out into the world, and also teaching them, engaging them with new models of being. So in New Zealand, there's this amazing program that brings young kids up to live on an intentional community where they're exploring with different models of permaculture and all of that. And the kids are having these profound, powerful experiences where they come back to their homes. They sign up as members of Greenpeace. They start to major in permaculture in college, and so it's having this huge direct influence on them. But I mean, I would say it really starts with empowering the kids and having more trust that the kids intuitively know the direction that they want to move in and express their creativity, and really honoring that they're creative beings first and foremost. And so how can we create containers that empower that creativity to unfold in a direction that both serves them and the collective?
Thank you, Weston. Thank you for that presentation.
Yeah, thank you.